Hello, my name is Susan Piver. I'm a writer and longtime practitioner and teacher of Buddhism. I've come to see that many people think of Buddhism and meditation practices associated with it, like mindfulness, as ways to reduce stress. But I would like to tell you that the Buddhist path is far more rich than that. It is a way to wake up, to become liberated from suffering. And forget about enlightenment, it's also a way to live your everyday life more fully and meaningfully. This podcast is to share with you classical Buddhist teachings that I have found enormously beneficial, and also to tell stories from my own life about how I applied and misapplied these teachings. And I do want to tell you from my more than 30 years of experience that the Dharma is real, and it provides an extraordinarily nuanced, profound, and pragmatic guidebook to living a life of wisdom, compassion, and courage. I'm just back from teaching a retreat at Drala Mountain Center, a wonderful retreat center in the Colorado Rockies. It's my favorite place, actually. And the name of this retreat was Fearless Creativity, a meditation and writing retreat. And I've taught this particular retreat many times over the last 15 years or so. And I can tell you that nobody comes to a program like this to write about the best day of their life, to write about their happiest moments. We all show up to write about our most difficult moments, the things that we cannot make sense of, the things that if we were to try to bypass them would turn around and clobber us over and over again. So I'm talking about things like grievous loss, rape, murder, even heartbreaks of all kinds. There are things that happen in this life that stop our ability to make sense of anything. And this is the way I want to lead into this week's topic, which is the personal is not an obstacle. It is the way. Also, parenthetically, at the end of this podcast, we'll continue our podcast after party with a piece of music that I love, so please stay tuned for that. And also in this episode, I want to start answering your questions. You all have been kind enough to send me questions, and I have a list of them, and I will start to answer them in this episode between this topic and the super fun after party. So there are many teachings, and correctly so, on the topic of egolessness, and great masters throughout the ages and in all the wisdom traditions, as far as I can tell, have said in one way or another, the cause of suffering is ego. If you could dissolve your ego, if you could see beyond your ego, if you could be egoless, you would be blissed out or enlightened, free from suffering. And because I trust everything I've been able to verify in the Buddhist world, I trust this teaching too. However, when this teaching, your ego is the problem, reaches us Westerners, if I may speak on behalf of all of us, it mixes with, very broadly speaking, Judeo-Christian notions of sin. And it's easy to exchange the word sin for ego. Like, that's the problem. You need to cleanse yourself of sins. That's one way of saying it. Or another way could be to say, don't have an ego. That's a mistake. And I want to explain why I think that. So going back to this extraordinary meditation and writing retreat that I've just returned from, and I say extraordinary not because I did such a great job, although I hope I did, but because the courage and trust that the participants had in themselves, and maybe even more importantly, in each other, was so moving. And if anyone there had come to write about anything less meaningful, maybe it would have been a good retreat, but it would not have been cathartic, life-changing, softening, even a way to experience a return of joy, which are things people said after the retreat. If they had chosen to write about something less central to their lives. So people wrote about very difficult things, and that in itself is brave. But that is not the key piece of what was transformative about it, as far as I can see, and this will get back to our topic in a moment. But what made it so potent was that people were heard, they were listened to, we felt into each other's experience and discussed that experience, not as writers who were critiquing style or grammar, but as listeners who were feeling into the truth of the readers, in this case, the experience that they were sharing. Now, each of those two pieces are vitally important. First piece, a human being is willing to look at their suffering and then try to express it, in our case, in writing. Amazing, huge, life-changing, all the things. However, the second piece is equally as important, which is being witnessed, being seen and heard, not just for the story of what the reader had experienced, but in the moment that it's shared. So we're listening to someone read a story, whether it's fictionalized or memoir or however it is they want to express it, and we're diving in with them to follow the narrative line. And it's that following that is so important. Going with the writer, feeling each moment that the writer is expressing, not knowing where it's going to go, but staying on the ride. That is what seems to produce relief from suffering. Not permanently, or you can't undo the tragedies of your life, but you can work with them to deepen your capacity for love and wisdom, not for feeling better. That's not one of the options, it seems, but for not shutting down. Now, if we were to try to apply teachings on egolessness to people who have suffered great tragedies, that would be cruel. If anyone tried to say to anyone, well, that's just your ego talking when you're expressing the suffering of your child's death or the violence you or a loved one experienced, well, that would be not just cruel, it would be crazy. We have to start with who we are and what we feel in order to traverse the spiritual path. So over the years that I've been a practitioner, and now we're talking about a ton of years, more than 30, I've heard in various circumstances, well, that's just your ego talking. Or aren't I supposed to not have a self in order to be spiritual? Or wouldn't things just be okay if only I didn't have an ego? That's just my ego. When people say that to themselves or to me, because in the past I've heard people say that's just your ego when I'm upset about something, which makes me really even more upset. That is your ego talking. It's your ego that is saying, if only you didn't have an ego. Or it's your ego that's saying to me, Susan Piver, who's upset about something, well, that's just your ego. Well, my ego wants to punch your ego in the face when I hear things like that. I'm not counseling violence, believe me. But it makes me angry when I hear that because it's a weird, I would say, Western culture way of saying, shut it. You don't count. And if you think you count, that makes it even worse. So stop thinking you count. Stop thinking your experience matters because all of that is ego. And I say ego schmigo. That is what you have to work with. Yourself, your sorrows, your brilliance, your chaos, your confusion, your history, your genetic makeup, the sandwich you just ate. That is what you have to work with. And that is what we try to bring to the path. Now, if we, you or I, tried to start with egolessness is the aim, shut up, don't be a person, stop having wants and joys and all that, well, of course, that would be ridiculous. And also, it wouldn't work. It would be your ego in a gladiator fight with itself. And we want to avoid that. So the idea here is not to discount who you are. Don't do that. But to count, to enter, to experience fully, to turn your attention toward, to open to notice your incredible qualities and your craziness and all the things as mentioned, and inquire into them, not for academic or psychological reasons. Oh no, for reasons rooted in love and curiosity and bravery. It takes courage to look at yourself. And it's only by looking directly at your experience that you stand any possibility of seeing what may be beyond that experience. So when most of us, as far as I can see, attempt to master egolessness, quote unquote, we try to self-erase. It makes us smaller and smaller. That can't be what the great sages of history have meant by please try to accomplish egolessness. I don't think they meant please try to shut up. So instead of trying to tone down or bypass your wants and desires and greatness and kookiness and all the things, you could relax with them, not try to make them into anything or nothing. And in this way, you stand a greater chance of seeing whatever may be beyond you, your ideas, which I'm sure are quite smart. So I'm not saying don't have them. Your judgments, your opinions, your wishes, your hopes, your fears, all of these things are contained, according to the Buddha Dharma, in an integrated field, for lack of a better way of saying it. And the true wisdom that is beyond your judgments and your ideas and so on comes to you. It doesn't come from you. That's a very essential point. And things come to us more readily when we open, when we relax, when we look, when we delay deciding what things mean. The field of receptivity grows wider. So this, by the way, the personal is not an obstacle. It is the way, is the second principle in my upcoming book, Inexplicable Magic, Meditation for Mystics. The first one, which we talked about last week, was we engage in daily ritual. Now, what I want to point out about these two things, and also the subsequent 5, but we'll talk about those later, is they run contrary to conventional wisdom currently about mindfulness and meditation and so on. So the first one, we engage in daily ritual, is saying, hey, y'all, your meditation is not something on the to-do list only. It's not a self-improvement technique that you should try to knock out every day. It's a way of communicating with yourself, with your environment, and it's a way, too, of issuing a sort of invitation to the wisdom that is all around you and is in search of you, at least as much as you may be in search of it. So ritual reinforces this notion that is my new favorite thing to say. What you seek does not come from you. It comes to you. And when you include meditation as part of a ritual rather than a task, that field of receptivity opens a little bit wider, I'll just say again. And the second principle that we're talking about now, the personal is not an obstacle, it is the way, similarly runs contrary to conventional wisdom about meditation and spirituality, which is everything would be fine. You would be completely enlightened. You would have no problems. There's only one issue that you have to resolve, and that issue is you. If only you didn't exist as yourself, things would be fine. Well, that's very cruel and silly. And when I hear things like that, I think, well, that person must not know what they're talking about. So we want to start with what's personal. We want to start with our trials and tribulations and joys and brilliance and, as mentioned, all those things. And they will show us the way, not trying to bypass them or change them or strong-arm them into some other form. So a good analogy for this, or a good sort of instruction for doing this, is something I once heard a Tibetan Rinpoche say about how to work with your mind. He said, if you throw a stick for a dog, the dog runs after the stick. If you throw a stick for a lion, the lion turns around to see who threw it. And that's the groove we're looking for in our spiritual practice. Where did that come from? What is that? Now, what is that? And now it's now again, as the great Texas singer-songwriter Butch Hancock said. So I hope this is useful, of course, and that if you have had any sense that you should be egoless or that's just your ego or any of that bullshit, I will say, please try to relax those notions and experiment with the idea. I think someone wrote a book called Ego is the Problem. I think that's what it was called. Anyway, maybe that's true. I haven't read it. But I would say thinking ego is the problem is the problem. We're looking for a more intimate, even passionate, warm, fierce way of relating to ourselves, something beyond. If only you would shut up, you could make progress on the spiritual path. I'm sort of joking about that last bit, but I'm not really joking at the same time. So next week, we'll talk about the third principle of inexplicable magic, which is we recognize heartbreak, which also runs contrary to conventional wisdom about spiritual practice, which says it will get rid of your heartbreak, or it will heal your heartbreak, or it will enable you to be exempt from heartbreak. Well, I have found quite the opposite. So please come back next week. And the question that I would like to answer, and if you have a question, by the way, you can somehow respond via wherever you're listening to this podcast, or you could DM me on Instagram, Susan Piver, or just send me an email, susan@susanpiver.com. So this question is from someone called Paula. Hello, Paula. In all honesty, Paula says, I don't understand what is meant by non-duality, and it's kind of irritating me. Wondering if you could take another approach at explaining or pointing to it, non-duality. I've been practicing for 3 years now, and while that's not very long, I have no more insight into, quote, non-self than when I started. I hear people's experience with non-duality, and I don't know what the heck they're talking about. So thank you for this question, Paula. In many ways, I share this question, and in other many ways, it is a perfect adjunct to our theme this week. What is non-duality? Well, when you pose that question, not you, Paula, but anyone, when anyone poses that question, you've just taken 10 steps back in the effort to find an answer. And I think it is great news that you don't understand non-duality and that you actually feel irritated by trying to understand it. I think both of those, acknowledging that you don't get it and feeling frustrated by that, are signs that you are closer to understanding, or understanding isn't even the right word, experiencing non-duality than any other way of trying. Like you could make a list of pros and cons, why non-duality is true or why it isn't true. You could read great works on non-duality, and that's highly recommended. There are truly remarkable masters who have tried to find a way to explain the inexplicable, but it would not bring you to the realization of non-duality. Harkening back to our conversation on egolessness, egolessness is the full expression, I posit, of non-duality. Not because you have understood it, but because you have released, it has dissolved, you have recognized, I'm not sure how to say it, the inseparable nature of you and me and all phenomena. And that's what egolessness is. I am part of a whole. I am not separate from it. Now, one cannot realize that through cogitation. One can only relax one's notions over and over and over again about what that might mean, to seek rather to experience what that might mean. The greatest wisdom cannot be understood, only experienced, felt, received. I know that's not helpful, Paula. I hope it's not more irritating by the same token. And I will just add one more thing about people who have experienced non-duality. I'm not one of them. So I'm with you, Paula. I have never had any kind of what I would say great mystical spiritual experience while meditating, even though it's been 30 plus years, as I've mentioned. I hear about people who do. I'm like, good. I'm happy for them. I really mean that. Never happened to me. However, my life has changed completely. My insight into myself, my relationships, my world, the Dharma have increased immeasurably from my practice. Nothing happens while I'm practicing. I'll just say that again. But the field of wisdom, for lack of a better phrase, of love, of truth, seems to extend itself toward me more readily. I don't extend myself toward it because I don't know how, but it seems to come toward me more readily. And I would say that that is a more expeditious route to the understanding of non-duality, which can never be understood. So I hope that's useful. I'll say that again. And now for our podcast after party, I want to play a track for you called Under Me Slang Tang. Now, if you don't know what that means, that's smart because it comes from deep within Jamaican culture, a culture that I am not a part of. But I have worked in the music business in my past, and my personal husband was a founder of a reggae label called Heartbeat, a roots reggae label. And over the years of knowing him and just being involved in music in general, I have developed a great love and a outsider sense of appreciation for reggae music, particularly of the 1980s, for whatever reason. A time period where it went from the pure roots, which is also heavenly, to dance hall. And then after dance hall went into other forms. But that whole 80s era to me has much of the reggae that I really, really, really love, including Under Me Slang Tang. Under Me Slang Tang, recorded by an artist named Wayne Johnson. I think his birth name was Wayne Ian Flemings Johnson. Now, Ian Flemings, you might think, well, didn't Ian Fleming write James Bond novels? Well, you would be right. And during this period, 80s and probably the 70s too, many Jamaican artists, not many, but some Jamaican artists started riffing on Western culture and taking on the flavor, the names even, the words associated with it. And Ian Fleming lived in Jamaica, at least part-time, I believe on the western tip near Port Antonio. And, that was a famous dude and was a magnetizing presence, one could assume. So Wayne Ian Fleming Smith, there's also, by the way, a reggae artist from that era named Lee Van Cleef, who was the name of an actor in spaghetti westerns. And it's really interesting and wonderful and cool how these strands of American culture, shouldn't say Western, were picked up in Jamaica in particular and turned into things far more interesting, if you ask me, far more creative, far more profound and hilarious and deep and rich and than we probably would have done on our own with these same strands. So back to Under Me Slang Tang. It's a song, as far as I understand, about smoking dope. And it's not a criticism of it. It's not a celebration of it. It's about what it feels like. That's my interpretation of smoking weed. And that's not what is most interesting about it. What is most interesting about it is it became central to reggae music because of its rhythm, or rhythm as is more accurately called, because rhythm here, or rhythm, doesn't mean the tempo. It means like the music bed that the track lays in, that the vocal lays in, that the song is crafted on top of. The slang tang rhythm has been used for decades by countless artists as the bedrock of whatever track they're trying to create. So often in reggae music in this time period, anyway, first people were just inspired by the rhythms of other people's creations, just like music is sampled here. the sampling started, as far as I can tell, there in reggae music in Jamaica in the 80s. And Slang Tang was the first fully digital such recording. It was made on a Casio, as I have read. And then because it was digital, it could be sampled, it could be used, it could be mixed. And it has been. Also, in this era, because things were digitized and could be mixed and reused, the whole dub era started. Lee Scratch Perry and King Tubby and all sorts of legends from that era were able to express their creativity even without perhaps the monetary resources to go into a studio and hire artists and do all the things, but because they could get digital access to amazing recordings and then riff upon them. So we've all been the recipients of that creativity rooted in digital music. So without further ado, and if there's anybody listening who knows way more about reggae than me, which would be easy to imagine, if I misrepresented anything about Wayne Johnson or Slang Tang or Lee Scratch Perry or anything that I've talked about, I would be grateful if you would call my attention to that. So thank you for listening. Come back next week, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Away in my brain.